Good morning. I'm Ricardo Contreras, and I would like to welcome you to the new series, Explorations in ATLAS.ti, Applications in Qualitative Data Analysis, which is a partnership between ATLAS.ti, the International Qualitative Research Toolkit at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan campus, and the Indiana University School of Education Inquiry Methodology. The purpose of this series is to showcase different cases of people using ATLAS.ti in their data analysis. We are going to start this series with my presentation on visualizations. Today's presentation is titled Qualitative Visualizations in ATLAS.ti, Building the Understanding Through Code-to-Code Semantic Relationships. I will show you an example, really an experiment that I'm doing of creating visualizations that show the semantic relationships between codes in a project that uses field notes written by community health workers who are providing wraparound services to families affected by COVID-19 in Oregon. I will create a set of semantic relationships based on James Spradley in the ethnographic interview book, when he proposes what he refers to as universal semantic relationships. So I'm going to use those relationships to connect codes to code semantically, and in that way facilitate my understanding of the data. So let me start by saying something about qualitative visualization. So a project with ATLAS.ti is a system of linkages, of connections that we are creating, and those connections can be visualized graphically in what we refer to as networks. These networks are useful because they provide a systemic view of our work. For example, instead of seeing a particular code as in a document, right, coding, what we refer to as ATLAS.ti, in ATLAS.ti code in a quotation, well, we can see that code, but as part of a system with all of the elements connected to that element. So that can facilitate our understanding of the data, right? Because it brings it all together. It shows the whole rather than individual pieces. And these are qualitative visualizations because they show relationships and connections rather than frequencies or other numerical indicators. Now, I started by saying that in ATLAS.ti, an analysis project is made up of links, and these links can be visualized graphically. Now, the links are of two different kinds. One, what we call first order or named, that is when we say, okay, what is represented or what is meant by code X, I think, you say, is contradicting what is meant by code Y. So you are linking code X with code Y through a relationship that you say is a contradiction relationship, right? Now you decide that X is contradicting Y. That is your job as a researcher. And at the same time, you can say, well, and what Mary said in quotation 1 is explaining what Susan said in quotation 3. So you as a researcher are saying that those two quotations, those two units of the discourse are related with each other because one is explaining what is meant by the other. You see? So those are called first order or named. They are semantic and they can be established between codes and between quotations. And the second one, called second order or unnamed, all of the other links of a project, they are like that. For example, when you select a segment of in an interview, and that segment becomes a quotation in ATLAS.ti, let's say a paragraph, and then you code that with a code, let's say job satisfaction. Well, you are making a connection through coding, and that connection is of a second order. I am not in that case connecting codes to codes through specific meanings or quotations to quotations through specific meanings. So I think that the visualizations that I will show you now will help understand this. Here on the left side, we have a code, family, one child, and I relate that code with a set of other codes that are around it. And those codes are connected to the code at the center through a relationship that is called perceive. Effects negative, more worries, stress, responsibilities. Relates through the perceived relationship with the code that is at the center, family, one child. So I decided to do that. I could have chosen other relations as well. And then the second one on the right side shows the case of quotations. When I say quotation 3209 and quotation 3160, I say is both are contradicting what is meant by in quotation 513. And at the same time, I say what is said in quotation 3209 is supporting the argument made in quotation 3160. So you see this quotation to quotation linkages using these semantic relations help us build a map of how participants are building their arguments. And here we have examples of second order links. On top left, we have at the center a node representing a document group that is a grouping of different sources of information, all of the people who with a high school education. And who are those people? Well, those are the ones represented by the nodes around. Those are documents of the project. Document 1, case 1, case 22, case 4, etc., etc., etc. All of those, they represent people with high school education. And you see the lines connecting those individual interviews with the document group, education, high school, those lines have no names. That is why we refer to them as unnamed links. And at the same time, at the center, we have, right at the center, a document, parenting block, comments on Paut-Havi. That document, which is at the center, is surrounded by a set of codes. Well, that network shows that in that document, we use those codes that are around it. Reasons for HC, cultural embedded beliefs, effects negative on relationships, children, less happiness, etc. Right? So the network simply shows that. In that document, we use those codes. And then the other network shows at the center a given code, and around it the quotations to which that code is connected. In other words, study participants are saying a number of different things represented by those quotations in relation to the code family don't want children, which is the code at the center. Again, the lines connecting the code to the quotation are lines without names. So those are non-semantic linkages. And here we have a network that shows a combination of both. We have a code, sources, activities, and experiences that is coding quotation 448 that is above, quotation 386 that is on the left side, quotation 47 which is on the left side below, quotation 519 which is above on the right side. So that code, sources, activities, and experiences is coding is coding all of these quotations. And at the same time, I have that quotation 4.7 is supporting quotation 5.15. You see that? That is a first order quotation to quotation linkage that I created to represent the idea that I think that quotation 4.7 is supporting what is said in quotation 5.15. And there are other semantic linkages there as well, when we have codes linked to other codes through relations. The code, the blue one on top right, family, don't have children, is linked through the view relation with the code source activities and experiences and source relationships and so on. Okay, but what you need to see is that all of those lines, they have names, and those are the semantic relationships that I use to link codes with codes to represent my understanding. So this network is very special because it shows a combination of those first order links, code to codes, quotation to quotations, as well as the second order links for. And then what I did then in this experiment, I created a set of relationships. In fact, ATLAS.ti refers to them as relations, okay? But I'm using the terminology from Spradley. The universal semantic relationships that I created are, from the book, is a kind of, that is a spatial inclusion relationship. I'm sorry, my apologies. It's a strict inclusion relationship. It's a place in, which is a spatial relationship, represents relationships about space, that have to do with space. It's a part of, I did not have to create it because ATLAS.ti already comes with that one. Cause effect is a result of, I created that one. It's a cause of, it's already in ATLAS.ti, it came with the program. It's a reason for doing, it's a relationship that has to do with a rational, rational, and then it's a place for doing. It represents a location for action. You know, a kitchen is a place for cooking, right? It's used for, a fork is used for eating. So that is a relationship that represents a function. It's a way to do, means end, right? Driving a car is a way to get into the supermarket, right? So it's a way to do, it's a way to do something, means to an end. Then it's a step or stage in. X is a step or stage in Y. It represents a sequence. So I do one thing that will take me to something else. So that is what we mean by a step in. Well, what can I say about this as an example, right? I pick up a pen, and that is a step in writing, right? It's a step in writing. You could think about that as an example. An attribution is a characteristic of something. So X is a characteristic of Y, right? Beauty is an attribute of flowers. You could say something like that. Beauty is a characteristic of flowers, right? So these are the universal semantic relationships that come, or that Spradley proposed in the book. And I wanted to experiment with them. I wanted to use them in describing a narrative, an account from a community health worker who was talking in her, or who wrote in her diary about what she did in a particular week. Okay? By the way, what she did in a particular week in relation to her work providing services to families affected by COVID-19. So this is the narrative that with which I worked. These are the field notes written by a community health worker who's providing services related to COVID-19. So I, to work with this, with this experiment of using the Spradley semantic relationships, I was able to get this narrative, and I coded a couple of paragraphs of it. And I proceeded to code through the in vivo coding procedure. In vivo coding is when you select a segment and that selected segment becomes the code. Right click, code in vivo. So the name of the code that I created is given by the segment that I selected. This can only be used when working with textual data. So in other words, the code that is created is using the words of the text. You can say that the code is named with the participant's own words. Okay? So if you can think of a type of coding that is very descriptive, that is very close to the point of view of the participant, in vivo coding is precisely that. So that is what I did. I went on and proceeded to code in this way. So as I was reading then, I was looking for labels that I think were kind of descriptive of the main points that she was making. This week, my energy was on the lower side. I had to do a trip to Harrisburg to drop off gift cards for a family who is in quarantine. I had to stop by the office on Saturday afternoon. I didn't have a badge. I set the alarm off. The staff of the building showed up. I was able to clear up the situation. So there was a misunderstanding there because the alarm went off and the staff of the building came and she had to explain what happened and everything was okay. Then on Monday night, after work, I was cutting bread at home and I cut myself and ended up in urgent care. So you see, these are precisely codes that represent what happened to her during that week, or the main elements that she identified in her narrative of the week that she defines as a low energy week. Then I did it again as she kept on talking about her week and describing her work. So I proceeded with that, creating those in vivo codes. Next, I created these code-to-code relations, or using the language of Spradley, the universal semantic relationships. And I did that by going to links, relations, new relation. I give the name to it. I already created them, so I cannot. I don't want to create them again. So I'm gonna write any relationship. Okay. I will assign to it a color. The formal property. Let me try to explain very quickly what this means. Asymmetric is when you say A is a property of B, but that does not mean that B is a property of A. So the relationship only goes in one direction, from A to B, but not necessarily from B to A. So that is an asymmetric relationship. Symmetric is when you say A is to B, but you can also say that B is to A. For example, A is associated with B, and therefore B is associated with A. You see that? So the relationship goes both ways. Transitive is the kind of relationship you use to build hierarchical structures, tree structures. So let's imagine here the following, that you have a set of fruits. Okay, you have a code called fruits. Then you have a code called apples, and a code called green apples, another one called red apples. So you say apples is a fruit, and then you say green apples is an apple. But you can also say green apples is a fruit. So that is transitive. Okay, if you could draw that on a piece of paper, you will see what I meant to say. Transitive. So I will have to determine what it is, and let's say symmetric in this case, and create. So that is what I had to do. I had to create all of these relationships that come from Spradley. Is a kind of, is a place for doing, is a place of, is a reason for doing, is a result of. And then I wrote down in the comment space of the relationship, I wrote down the kind of relationship it is following Spradley. It's a result of, it's a cause-effect relationship, it's a step in, it's a sequence relationship. It represents sequences of events. It's a way to do, it's a means-end relationship. This is a means to do that, right? Picking up a spoon is a means to drink a soup or to eat the soup. You can think of sequences, many examples. It's an attribute of, attribution relationship is used for function relationship. It's a function. This is used for that. And I created my own that this one does not come from Spradley, but I really felt I needed it. Is the context of. This is a contextual, let me call it a contextual relationship. So this provides a context for that. So I had to create these relationships. I gave them different colors to the lines, and I gave different sizes to the lines. You see on top, you can select a relationship, and then you select the color, the line width, the line style, let's say dashed in this case, the formal property, symmetric, the layout, I keep always the default, left to right. And then when you start using it, you will see those lines represented in the network. So that is the next thing that I did, right? After creating these relationships, I created a new network, new entities, new network. Example, let me say this, because I already created it, so I'm not going to create this from scratch for you, but I just wanted to show you how you proceed. So I went to home, new entities, new network. I created it, then nodes, add nodes, and I selected the codes that I wanted to connect one with the other. Let me select a set of them without really paying too much attention to them, to their meanings, and there you have them, right? One after the other, and so on. And next, what I did, I started to link one with the other. Select one, drag and drop, and link, okay? And that is what I did. So let me now go back to the actual network that I created, now that you know the procedures of how to do that. Let me open the network, the low energy week first. Yeah, so what do we have here? These are the codes that I created, which, as you may remember, they are represent what the person actually said. They use the words of the participant. So I created the network and I placed inside of it these codes. And how did I do it? Nodes, add nodes, codes, and I proceeded to select the codes that I wanted to have in what I would refer to as a canvas, right, where you are making these connections. And once once these codes were inside of this canvas, I started to think about how could I relate them using the semantic relationships that Spradley recommends. Now, as I was doing this experiment, I noticed that I was kind of forcing too much the structure into the data, right? Rather than eliciting from the data individual semantic relationships that may or may not coincide with the ones provided by Spradley, I decided to use Spradley's relationship. So in that way, I was kind of forcing a little bit the situation here. And as a result of that, I noticed, for example, that I needed to create a new relationship that is not any of the ones that Spradley recommends, and that is the context of or the context for. So what she said, this week my energy was on the lower side. I interpreted that as being the context for two things that happened to her that week. One is the problem with the badge at the office when the staff came, and the second is what the problem of having cut her finger and ending up in urgent care. So those two things happened as part of this larger context of the week being a low energy one. So let's examine first of all the badge issue. She said, I had to do a trip to Harrisburg to drop off gift cards for a family who's in quarantine. I think that what she also said, I had to stop by the office on Saturday afternoon. Stopping in the office on Saturday afternoon is a step in going to Harrisburg to drop off gift cards for a family who is in quarantine. So it's a step in, is the relationship that Spradley suggests represents a sequence. Okay, so one thing is a step to get to do something else as part of a sequence, right? So pick up the gift cards at the office is a step towards or in the process of dropping off those gift cards to families. And then I say, well, on the code, I didn't have a badge, and the badge is used for opening the office. So I use the relationship is used for. That also comes from Spradley, and that relationship represents a function. A badge is used to open the office. And then I did not have a badge, and that is a cause of setting the alarm off. So I link those two codes with the relationship is a cause of. And that caused the school district staff showing up. School district staff still showed up. The staff of the school district where the office is located came to check, prompted by the alarm that went off after she tried to open the door without having the badge. And at the same time, the school district staff showing up is a reason for clearing up the situation. In other words, after talking with the staff, she was able to clear up the situation. I am not 100% certain if that there is a reason for doing relationship applies in this case, but still I am using it, and I may revisit this later on. Now, she ended that account by saying, these situations did impact some of my productivity this week. The problem opening the office door and the accident in the kitchen affected her week, not the day, but the week. But they were also a result of what she initially described as a low energy week. So I say that setting the alarm off and the accident at the kitchen, they are both an attribute of that week. The attribute of, Spradley defines that as a characteristic of the week, right? It's a characteristic of the week. So those two are characteristics, right? The problem with the alarm and the accident. Now, I included in this network this quotation, which is really a synthesis of everything, or not a synthesis, but it's really her narrative that describes the week, and that I try to represent through this code-to-code network. So what I realized in this experiment is that the act of creating this network, of linking these codes with each other through these Spradley relationships, the act itself facilitated the building of my understanding of that narrative. And I represented that understanding in the form of a memo. And the memo is the synthesis of that. Let me place that memo right on the right side of the network. So that is something you can do in ATLAS.ti. You can look at the network on one side, the network that you are creating, and then you proceed to write a memo in which you represent your understanding. But the point that I am making is that that writing is facilitated by the act of establishing these semantic linkages between these codes. Okay? So the steps really are the following. First, in vivo coding. Second, establish semantic linkages between those in vivo codes. And I used for that the Spradley universal semantic relationships, but you don't have to. You can use any relationships you want. And third step, I write a memo in which I represent my understanding. So that memo then is a result of the other two steps, right? The in vivo coding and the process of creating the network. Another network that I created is to represent my understanding of what she wrote in those field notes following the description of the low energy week. She went on to talk about what she was doing as part of the Wraparound assistant program. So here we have a node, COVID-19 Wraparound assistance, and we have the community health worker in her notes. She wrote that it's unfortunate that we are so limited in funding. That is what she sees as a characteristic of the program, that there is limited funding. So I linked the two codes with the relationship is an attribute of. According to Spradley, the attribute of is equivalent to a characteristic of something, and it is defined as an attribution semantic relationship. So the person thinks that it's unfortunate that we are so limited in funding, and she sees that as a characteristic of the program. Then we have, I did have a family who asked for utilities and rent assistance. So I linked that code with the code COVID Wraparound Assistance through the relationship called is a reason for doing. Is a reason for doing is a rational semantic relationship according to Spradley. So what she is saying is that I did have a family who asked for utilities, and that, in her view, is a reason for having the Wraparound Assistance Program. And then she also says we are still getting people who need retroactive assistance, and she also sees that as a reason for doing the Wraparound Assistance Program. And here I have the quotation where she explains all of that. Well, she, let's say, not explains, but where she writes the narrative that has to do with these codes that we have in pink, as well as the code at the center, which is a Wraparound Assistance Code. And then, in addition to that, this person talks about sending the people who apply for services information, and she refers to that information as educative post. So they are really social media posts, and she identifies a set of pieces of information that she will send people. So those posts are the following: how to care for others if someone is positive in the household. So she will send information on that. What to do if you have COVID symptoms or test positive for COVID. So these are two pieces of information, right, that she's going to send. So I link them to the code educative post through the relationship is a kind of. And is a kind of is defined by Spradley as a strict inclusion relationship. And I used the is associated with relationship that comes with ATLAS.ti. I did not have to create this one because really how to care for others if someone is positive, I saw that statement very similar to what to do if you have COVID symptoms. So that is why I link them to with the is associated relation. And then she will send information on contract tracing expectations, vaccine information, testing information, and information on the new strains of COVID-19 and how to protect yourself. So all of these yellow codes that I have around educative posts, I say that they are kinds of posts, right? They are kind of educative or educational posts. So that is the relation that or relationship that I used in this situation. And then we have that she sees the emergency fund, the implementation of the emergency fund, which is a bucket, let's call it, of funding that is available to help families. That is a step in the process of implementing the Wraparound Assistance Program, right? So that's why I use is a step in, because I see that, yes, if we implement this fund, then we are implementing the Wraparound Assistance Program. Now, she said that the first thing she needs to do is to understand the situation of the applicant. And so that is why I linked the code. What I had been doing is to first understand the situation. I linked that code to the code emergency fund with the relationship is a step in. Because understanding the situation of the applicant is a step in the implementation of the fund. Now, understanding the situation of the applicant involves knowing if the applicant is on time with rent. Check if paying rent on time. The community health worker checks if the applicant is on time with rent. So I linked that code, are they on time with rent, with the code what I have been doing is to first understand the situation through the is-part relationship. And the is-part relationship is a spatial relationship according to Spradley. And then the situation isn't considered an emergency unless the person is in a critical condition. The community health worker has to assess if the applicant is in a critical condition, which is a requisite for applying to emergency funds. So that is also part of what she needs to do to first understand the situation. So she has to determine whether they are on time with rent, but also she has to assess the situation. Now, she will send applicants information that will allow to assess the situation. And she will send then printed out frequently answered question sheet. So the community health worker will print out and send to the applicants a sheet with frequently asked questions. She will also inform applicants about the eviction moratorium and that our emergency fund is small. She will also send them the form that they have to complete for the declaration of financial problems, stating the financial need they need or the financial need that they have. And she will also send the applicant her own notes, and my own notes, highlighting the important information that if they are considering to take this decision, they can discuss their situation with the Oregon Law Center. Now, all of these, the notes, the declaration of financial problems, or the form, then informing about the eviction moratorium program and FAQ, they are all part of what the community health worker will send the applicant. So that is why I use the is-part relation. And you are going to see here the narrative, the account in the words of the community health worker. So this is the quotation in which she talks about this post. I think that it makes sense to have the entire quotation here rather than fragments, right? I could have had a fragment for each one of the codes, but then I would be fragmenting this account too much. I prefer to have the whole account in which all of the connections are made, and then the account in which she describes the work around the emergency fund, and I already show you the account in which she talks about this wraparound assistance program. So I think these accounts are important because they represent the voice of the participant, right? These are the codes. Although we should clarify here that the codes themselves also represent the voice of the participant, because these codes were created through in vivo coding. That is, the names of the codes are given by the words of the participant. I did not have to create a construct. Rather, I'm using their words. So that is why I think that these codes already represent the point of view of the participant. All right, so what I realized as I was working on this, as I was making this network and making these connections, I realized that just like in the case of the low energy week that I described earlier, I realized that as I was making these connections, I was better understanding, right? The whole narrative that she wrote, what she wanted to express. So I would say then that the making of these connections, the establishing of these connections is a step in the process of developing my understanding. And then what I did is I wrote a memo. So let me go to my memos here. I'm going to open the Wraparound Services memo, and I will place it right on the side of the network, and I will close the left side panel. So then you see, this is great with ATLAS.ti, is that you can place your memo, the space for writing, right next to documents, to networks, and to other elements as well. So I wrote what I saw right in the network. You see that? I think this is so critical because you can think of networks in different ways. You can think of a network as a representation of what you already know. But you can also think of a network as a tool that will be instrumental in allowing you to build your understanding. You see that? So it's not only a reflection of what you know already, but it can also be seen as an instrument to help you build that understanding, to build a narrative in which you make sense of the phenomenon. And that is what I did in this case. Now, I can go to Excel, export, select what I want the table to include, and create an output of these relations. And here they are. Now, I will show you something else that I created a kind of a mock appendix with these tables. So I will get to that in a minute. And then you can also create under links, under home, if you select links rather than relations, you will see all of the links that we have created. So for example, what are the codes, in vivo codes, right, that we created that are linked to each other through the is kind of semantic relationship? Contact tracing expectations is a kind of educative post. COVID-19 testing information is also a kind of post. How to care for others, the same. Information on the COVID-19 strains, also a post, a kind of post. Vaccine information, also a kind of post. What to do if you have symptoms, also a post. What else do we have here? Let me show you some examples. Is a reason for doing. Let me see. Yeah, I did have a family who asked for utilities and rent assistance. That is a reason for doing the COVID-19 Wraparound Assistance Program. School district staff will still showed up after she tried to open the door. It's a reason for doing, I did clear up the situation. I am not very sure about this. I think I have to revisit this relationship. It may not be the best one. It doesn't, I think, it's not perfect. We are still getting people who need retroactive assistance. That is a reason for doing the wraparound assistance. So the first one and the second, those two, I think are clearly, they clearly connect with each other with a reason for doing relationship, which is, according to Spradley, is a rational relationship, a rational relationship. It's a step in. Sending this educative post or educational post is a step in the Wraparound assistance. I had to stop by the office on Saturday afternoon is a step in going to this city to drop off gift cards. We are going to create is a we are going to create. It meant we have to create several resources. is a step in implementing the emergency fund, and so on. So what I did here is I created an output of each one of these links, and let me show you how that output looks. It's like that, okay? And I did that for each one of these relations. It's a reason for doing, it's a kind of, it's a step in, etc. And then I went to Word, and in Word I created a set of appendices, right? So let's assume this is a real project and you are writing your report. I would say that you have to include the table with the relations or semantic relationships that you use. And those need to have a comment. A comment is a description or a definition. What does it mean by in a step in? According to Spradley, it's a sequence relationship. You see that? Is part of, is a strict inclusion relationship. I could have written more explaining that in more detail, but those are the definitions. And then I went on to create another appendix, and that appendix is of all of the actual links that I created between these codes, between these in vivo codes. Contact tracing expectation is a kind of educational or educative post. You see, the same thing with all of this. They're all a kind of post. And then I went to the is a reason for doing, and so on. I did all of that. And another appendix that I created was the appendix of the actual network. And below the network, I wrote my memo, in which I explained what I learned from reading this, or really not from reading the network, but where I explained what I learned as I was building this network. You see that? So this is important, right? Because you have to make sense of what you see in this network. Now, the network includes the quotation that explains all of this in the words of the participant. And then I went to the other network. Again, I wrote here my understanding of the whole process. And I was able to get this understanding helped or as a result of building this network. Okay? So that is what I wanted to tell you. Now I want to summarize some of the central ideas. And here is a figure through which I will try to summarize what we do and what we did and what I am proposing. I'm proposing then that to develop the understanding of the data, we can rely on these networks that we create, linking codes to codes through semantic relationships. Now, this also applies to quotation semantic relationships when we are describing arguments that people are making. But in this case, we are working with code-to-code semantic relationships. You start by reading the text, identify key terms, words or short phrases, highlight the text segments, and code through in vivo coding. So I like to propose in vivo coding because that captures the words of the participant. When creating these codes through in vivo coding, I suggest that in the code comment space, you add your own name to the code. I'm not referring your name, but I'm referring that you paraphrase what the person said in that segment to your own words. And then you also add in the comment space of that code an explanation of what it means. Then in the third stage, let's say, of this process, you create a new network and start the process of linking codes to codes through semantic relationships. You can use relationships from a model, such as the Spradley Universal Semantic Relationships model that I used for this exercise, but you can create your own semantic relationships, and Spradley talks about informant expressed semantic relationships. Or you may use the relationships that come with ATLAS.ti, or a combination of all of those. Then you write the memos representing your understanding of the data. It's a good idea to place the window of ATLAS.ti where you write the memos side by side the network, so that as you are building the network, you are writing, or you write after you have built the network and you see in the network the representation of your understanding, then you proceed to write your memo. And then I am suggesting that you add to the final report that you have to produce as appendices the tables of relationships, as well as a table of links, the networks, and your memos in which you explain your understanding of the data through the networks that you created. So I hope this is helpful for you. So what I would end up saying here is that be creative, right? The ultimate purpose is to develop an understanding of the data. Use these networks as an opportunity to build that understanding, to create knowledge, right? And then you write that in the form of memos, and I think that you will find that very, very useful. So thank you very much for watching this presentation. Bye-bye.